David Gregory joins me. Great to see you.
Here I am. I was just hanging around. They said, come on.
Get out here.
But I've never come on a slow news day, so.
And it won't be one either.
But it's good to be here.
Okay, here's our starting line. The Washington Post reports that special counsel Robert Mueller has told President Trump's legal team that the president is a subject, but not a target, of his Russia investigation. The Post also reports that Mueller is preparing a report on the president's actions while in office and potential obstruction of justice. The White House says that President Trump plans to deploy the National Guard to secure the border with Mexico until his border wall is built. The president's announcement catching many Pentagon officials by surprise. So will Congress authorize using active duty troops for law enforcement inside the U.S.?
At the same time, you've got fears this morning of a trade war escalating as China is now firing back at the U.S., imposing tariffs on $50 billion worth of American goods, including soybeans, airplanes, and cars. A lot of this hurts our farmers in this country. It comes after the Trump administration detailed new tariffs on Chinese imports. And new details emerging about the shooting at YouTube's headquarters in California. Police identifying the woman who opened fire and what we're learning about why she was angry with the company. Let's begin this morning with our coverage. CNN's Abby Phillip, live at the White House with our top story. Hey, Abby.
Good morning, David. We are learning this morning some new details about exactly what kind of legal jeopardy President Trump might be in when it comes to the special counsel Robert Mueller. Now, he may not be the subject of a criminal investigation, but it's clear that he is not out of the woods just yet.
During negotiations last month between special counsel Robert Mueller and lawyers for President Trump, the Washington Post reports that Mueller said he was looking at the president as a subject of his investigation, but does not consider him a criminal target at this point. Mueller also relaying to Mr. Trump's team that investigators are compiling a report about the president's actions and possible obstruction of justice, stressing that he needs to interview Mr. Trump, according to the Post. Meanwhile, President Trump ramping up his tough talk on immigration, surprising Pentagon officials by announcing he wants to send the military to guard the southern border.
Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military. That's a big step. We really haven't done that before, or certainly not very much before.
The White House later saying that the president had been briefed about a strategy that includes mobilizing the National Guard, a step that both his predecessors took. Details remain unclear, but a source tells CNN that the president has been working on the number of troops he's considering. President Trump also taking credit for pressuring Mexico to block a group of Honduran asylum seekers from reaching the United States.
I have just heard that the caravan coming up from Honduras is broken up, and Mexico did that. And they did it because, frankly, I said, you really have to do it.
Mexico responding that the decision to break up the caravan was made solely by its members and not due to any external or domestic pressure. President Trump also reiterating his interest in pulling U.S. troops out of Syria.
I want to get out. I want to bring our troops back home. I want to start rebuilding our nation.
But just yesterday, CNN learned that the military is working on plans to send dozens of additional troops into Syria. And just minutes before Trump's remarks, the special envoy in charge of the mission to defeat ISIS said this.
We're in Syria to fight ISIS. That is our mission. And that mission isn't over, and we're going to complete that mission.
The president's public statement in stark contrast to this earlier criticism.
I don't want to tell the enemy how I am thinking. Does that make sense? Surprise. Remember, they used to call it the element of surprise. We must, as a nation, be more unpredictable. I don't talk about military response.
Mr. Trump also touting the administration's actions against Russia.
Nobody has been tougher on Russia, but getting along with Russia would be a good thing, not a bad thing. And just about everybody agrees to that, except very stupid people.
The outgoing National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster later contradicting the president's assessment.
Russia brazenly and implausibly denies its actions, and we have failed to impose sufficient costs.
Well, this new reporting about Mueller comes at a time when the first sentence was handed down in this case. A lawyer tied to one of President Trump's former campaign aides was sentenced to serve 30 days in prison and pay a fine, just really highlighting the stakes of this investigation for the people involved. Meanwhile, President Trump plans to have a pretty quiet day here at the White House before heading to West Virginia for a fundraising dinner. That's one of the things he's been doing several times in the last few weeks in preparation for the 2020 and 2018 election. Allison and David.
We'll see how quiet a day it is at the White House. Sometimes things change after 6 a.m. Abby Phillip, thank you very much for all that reporting. Let's bring in CNN political analyst John Avlon and CNN chief legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin. Jeffrey, the president is the subject of Mueller's probe, not a target. What's the difference?
There are three categories of witnesses in federal investigations. There's a witness, who is just someone who has information of value. There's a target, who is almost certainly going to be indicted. Then there's a subject, someone who is being scrutinized, who may be indicted, who may not be indicted. And that's the category that Trump falls in. But that's a very serious thing. I mean, if you are a subject of a criminal investigation, that means they are looking at you as someone who may be a criminal.
Play that out a little bit. If you are in an interview with prosecutors from Mueller's team, where they're gathering information, that status can change.
It can change, but if you are a lawyer and are told, as you have a right to be told, that your client is a subject, you almost always tell that person to take the fifth.
Yeah.
You don't take chances. Now, when your client is the President of the United States, assuming he gets another lawyer at some point, that calculation is a little different.
Why?
But because, can the President of the United States take the fifth? Certainly as a legal matter he can. But politically, it's a dicey question. I actually think the President can take the fifth and may well wind up doing.
Well, but the point of this whole question of whether you have criminal exposure as the President, you can be indicted, say, for obstruction of justice, doesn't include the idea that there is information here. There's a lot of talk that Mueller could write a report detailing presidential behavior, including potential obstruction of justice, that becomes fodder for a political process should they pursue impeachment proceedings against him. And then it's not a question of the law, but it's a question of whether there's high crimes and misdemeanors.
That's right. Impeachment being a non-legal process, but ultimately a political one. And Mueller is indicating that he's looking at two reports potentially. One focused on obstruction, the other about Russian collusion. But to Jeff's point, look, Trump could look at this news and his lawyers and feel a degree of vindication. See, I told you I wasn't a target. Problem is, subjects can become targets. And this is why Dowd, really, his former lawyer, was really focused on him not testifying, the danger of him making a misstatement that then could expand the scope. But now he's really down to Jay Sekulow and Ty Cobb. And Sekulow is not, necessarily the A-team. And it's a sign of chaos. Even Ted Olson, who was interviewed for this position and turned it down, said there's just chaos inside the president's legal counsel.
Because
so it's a serious thing.
I mean, they think that what we've heard is that they think that the president doesn't always take their advice, and so that's a frustrating experience. But what does it mean, the fact that that he's down to Jay Sekulow?
Well, Jay Sekulow is a very smart lawyer. He is a lawyer who specializes in the First Amendment rights of religious organizations, which is important, having almost nothing to do with criminal law. I mean, what the president needs is a lawyer with experience in criminal law. He still doesn't have one. I mean, it is an extraordinary spectacle to see the president reduced to legal Zoom, I think, to get who's going to represent him. I know, I don't think that's going to be the case. But he's got to resolve this question of whether or when he's going to be interviewed.
But do you really think that that's because impressive lawyers are turning it down, or he just hasn't cast a big enough net?
Well, I think it's both of those.
They're definitely turning it down.
They are turning it down, and I have no doubt that he will get another lawyer somewhere, but the idea that this extremely prestigious assignment is being turned down because he doesn't listen to lawyers, he thinks he's smarter than lawyers, he doesn't pay lawyers. I mean, this is a problem for him.
But the point Jeff is making also is important. Let's take a step back from Trump. It is extraordinary that a president is the subject of a criminal investigation from a special counsel from the FBI. And also that lawyers who normally would line up for the prestige of representing the president are running the other way.
And remember James Comey's initial conversations with the president, even before the inauguration. Trump kept pressing him to say, well, you're not looking at my behavior. You're not looking at me, are you? Right. And Comey fenced around that. Now we know they certainly are looking at it.
Well, and by the way, all of this is going to go on, whether the president is interviewed or not. Jim Comey's got a book coming out. He's going to go to war publicly with the president. There's going to be all of this back and forth. This is going to be rehashed, which is the very subject of whether the president obstructed justice or not in the course of this investigation. All that's going to play out. Let's switch gears and talk about this immigration proposal the president's talking about, militarizing the border. It's striking, John, you and I were talking about this. There are fewer illegal immigrants coming into America, and yet the president wants to put us on a war footing with the South.
Yeah, we are actually just reality checking this at a 46-year low in illegal border crossings. Got to go back to 1971. This is early Led Zeppelin, people, to put it in a cultural context. So this is not an urgent crisis in terms of the reality of people crossing the border. But it is a political crisis that the president has consciously stoked. And he's focusing specifically on Central America, which is why the caravans have gotten his attention. Draw a line between that and his concerns about the Honduran gang in the United States right now. So he's calling for military at the border. He's done this before in a political context. There are two problems with that. First of all, you can't literally put the U.S. military at the border. That's a violation of the Posse Comitatus law, but you can put National Guard. It has been done before. Bush did it. Obama did it. And now it looks like Trump's going to do it as well.
But this also may be, Jeffrey, trying to curry favor with the Ann Coulters of the world, who have been so vocal that he hasn't built the wall, he hasn't done enough. So now in the space of 72 hours, he's, doing all of these things that seem to be beefing up his immigration.
And it all started over the weekend when he was with Sean Hannity, when he was, and Ann Coulter gave a high-profile interview to the New York Times saying Trump was a disappointment. I mean, that appears to be driving this initiative far more than any actual situation in the real world. Apparently, Ann Coulter is dictating American immigration policy.
Yeah, but she is kind of an important voice in the Trump world, about a reminder of what promise he made that will stick with his core supporters more than anything else.
Right. Yeah. But if your presidential sense of self-esteem is tied up in Ann Coulter's opinion, you got a deeper problem.
Well, no, but I mean, she personifies the base.
Yeah.
And she speaks vocally and sort of fearlessly about it at any opportunity.
Very fearlessly, but she's not been shy about criticizing the president in really vocal terms, and you got to have a deeper North Star to steer by if you're president of the United States than Ann Coulter's opinion at any given moment.
A lot more on the Mueller probe and immigration as we move forward this morning. Let's switch gears. At the moment, an investigation underway after police say a woman opened fire at YouTube's headquarters in California, injuring at least 4 people. The shooter believed to have killed herself. CNN's Kyung Law live this morning in San Bruno, California with the very latest. Good morning.
After the U.S. published a list of 1,300 Chinese imports that will be hit with new tariffs. CNN's Ivan Watson is live in Beijing with all of the breaking details for us. What have you learned, Ivan?
Good morning, Allison. China has made it clear it's willing to go to a trade war with the U.S. if the Trump administration follows through on its proposal to impose this 25% tariff on $50 billion worth of Chinese exports to the U.S. So China has responded, saying that it is going to impose tariffs of the same scale and the same magnitude on $50 billion worth of U.S. exports to China. And they've singled out soybeans, for example, which was a $14 billion business for the U.S. in 2016, and airplanes, also a $14 billion business. As the Chinese embassy in Washington put it, they say it is only polite to reciprocate, as the Chinese saying goes. Now, the Chinese government has made it clear that this has not yet been imposed. Now is the time to negotiate and to cooperate. They're trying to urge Washington to continue going on with trade as a win-win, mutually beneficial trade of goods. The Trump administration has justified its threat of tariffs, accusing China of the theft of intellectual property. Well, China's Vice Minister of Commerce was asked about that accusation of intellectual property theft, and Wang Shouwen responded at a press conference today using a very Trumpian response, calling that allegation fake news. David and Allison?
All right, Ivan Watson, thank you very much. Let's bring back our panel. John Avlon, Jeffrey Toobin here. And John, you know, picking a fight with China, a lot of people don't realize that our farmers are extremely vulnerable. Just mentioning soybeans, there are other products that we're producing that make us vulnerable to Chinese retaliation, and we're starting to see that.
No question about it. And this is the other shoe. Earlier in the week, they made a first step towards this. You want to know what a trade war looks like? We're on the precipice of one. This is an absolute commensurate effort to push back on Trump. The impact on American farmers and businesses could be considerable. The question is this an escalation to get to a resolution? Or are we going here? In which case, watch out for the market, watch out for American manufacturers.
Yes. And one more beat on that. You know, the president has wanted since the beginning credit for his golden touch in the financial markets. But there is no question that his impulsiveness, as well as some of his decisions, have had a very real impact on the financial markets, giving back all of those gains and getting into full, at least potential correction territory. He's got to own this.
Well, that's right. And the one thing we know about tariffs and trade wars is that the stock market hates it. Now, the stock market is not the economy. The stock market is part of the economy, but it is an easy-to-measure barometer. And, you know, today it will be interesting to see. The market's going to open in a couple hours and see whether the market thinks we are headed for a trade war or this is just more posturing.
There's no way they're going to read this as a sign of confidence. But two things are also, I think, important to highlight. One, this is all coming as America's preparing for a potential summit with North Korea. China is a major player, obviously, in the region. This ratchets up the tension in an already tense situation in time. The second thing is the Chinese foreign minister, apparently, or trade minister's use of the word fake news. That term that Donald Trump has introduced has gone viral globally in not helpful ways. It is absolutely true that China has been a major proponent of IP theft over a long period of time. It's actually good to see the Trump administration get tough on it in that regard. But that's just more of the escalation we're seeing, which is going to have economic implications and quite possibly geopolitical national security.
But about those economic implications, obviously there could be repercussions for our farmers.
Yes.
And so the unintended consequence of America First. America First sounds wonderful. You know, obviously we're protecting America First. We care about our people the most. But then what happens when our farmers and our soybean farmers have to take the hit on this?
But trade policy always is going to have winners and losers. If you have no tariffs, that does hurt certain industries. But if you have tariff, that hurts others and helps some. So, I mean, it's not like there is some perfect mean out there that everybody wins.
It's
a matter of choice.
It's worth a couple of beats in defense of this policy. One, supporters of the president that I've talked to will say, look, this is still such a small portion of the economy, this trade deficit, that the tariffs may have an impact, but overall it'll be extremely low. And that, you know, this may still be the initial element of the president's negotiation on this that ends up getting us a better deal in the end. I think we have to hold that possibility out there.
It may, and that's the president's intention if he can keep focus on it and things don't spiral out of control.
Right.
The reason for a broader focus on free trade in the post-World War II world is that economic interdependence is better than military escalation.
Well, and that
has been
point
a really
about being a
powerful
thorough policy. I mean, Dow futures down over 500 points now, about 2%. The Dow came back somewhat yesterday after a drubbing the day before. I mean, this kind of volatility is in part because you have a president who is popping off from day to day, changing policy.
No question about it.
Okay, so let's talk about other policy that might be happening, and that's sending, as we've been talking about, these National Guard troops to the border. Primarily, we think, because he's been alarmed by some of the Fox News reports on a caravan of immigrants coming from Central America. Other presidents have done this. Other presidents have tried to secure the border with National Guard. Obviously, President Bush, President Obama. So, problem?
Not a particular big deal in and of itself, but the question is, are we having national policy in response to national problems or in response to criticism from Fox News? I mean, that's really the